This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Today we're going to talk about the high cost of higher education and student loans. It seems that every week I read a story in the press about the high cost of college and university, and it was an issue in the 2015 federal election campaign. Every time one of the leaders visited a college campus, there were demonstrations about the plight of students. Of course, under the Constitution, education is a provincial responsibility, so I'm not sure that there's a huge amount the feds can do about it, but I digress here. So what's the big deal? Why is this an issue? I guess one of the issues is that my perspective is a little out of date. I graduated from the University of Toronto in 1987 with a 4-year degree in commerce and economics. My recollection is that my tuition fees were something like $500 a term or around $1,000 a year. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a couple of $1,000s a year. And obviously that didn't include books and living costs. But it wasn't a huge amount. Now, I went on the U of T website, and apparently today the tuition fees for a basic arts and science program are just over $6,000 a year, and for a business and commerce program, it's just over $14,500 per year. Plus, you add in over $1,500 in ancillary fees, so my program today would cost over $16,000 a year. And of course, like I said, that doesn't include books or supplies or living costs. So, okay, costs go up, right? What's the big deal? Well, I went to the Bank of Canada inflation calculator, and something that cost $1,000 in 1987 would cost $1,845 today if you just adjust for inflation. So that's using an average and annual inflation rate of 2.2%. So over the last 28 years, that's an increase of about 85%. So obviously, something is out of whack here. If inflation says my education should cost $1,850 per year, but it's actually something like $16,000, what's the deal? So to talk about it, I've invited my Hoyes Michalos co-founder and business partner, Ted Michalos, back on the show. Ted, how are you doing today?
Just fine. Thanks, Doug.
So, okay, Ted, you graduated from university in 1991, so your timelines are similar to mine. Does it surprise you that university education costs so much today?
Yeah, I hadn't given a lot of thought because, as you know, my children are fairly young, so I've still got another decade before I have to start worrying about this. I recall that you've got a boy going to university next year, so this is near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely. Well, yes, I've got 2 teenage sons who will be entering post-secondary education sooner rather than later. So yeah, it is something I think about. And, I guess when I look at the numbers, I'm shocked that the ancillary fees are greater than the cost of what I was paying back in tuition in the day. So I think
you use that as that's the key to this whole thing. I mean, you and I have talked off air about this a number of times, and really post-secondary education's become a business. So they can charge whatever amount for tuitions, and I'm sure that there are federal regulations and provincial regulations that say this is how much you're supposed to get from the students. But the ancillary fees, all the add-ons, the athletic fee, the student center fee, the university, whatever you want to call it.
Health center fee.
That's right.
Yep.
I don't know that they're regulated to the same extent, and it's the university's opportunity to just pile them on. I mean, what will the market bear? How much can we charge before it becomes a question of, well, maybe I should go to that other school because their ancillary fees are lower.
And you're right. Post-secondary education has become a business. It's not about educating the students. I mean, obviously that's a part of it, but I get the impression it's more about how many can we push through the system. It's almost like a factory. Let's see how many we can get in.
Well, and my biggest complaint is that it's not vocational training. So the universities are always quick to say that we're giving you an education. We're teaching you how to think. That doesn't mean you're going to get a job. So the part of this that really drives me crazy is that we know that more and more students are borrowing more and more to pay for their education. And I'm not sure that they're getting value for the money. I mean, when they get out, they've got this huge debt load.
Because 50 years ago, I mean, you and I weren't in the workforce then, but I assume a high school education was kind of the standard, and frankly, maybe it was a grade 10 education that was a standard in order to get a job. Now I think it's become, well, if you don't have a post-secondary college education, university degree, you can't even get that entry-level position. So you're right, it has kind of pushed it all up. So you hit on the whole issue of financing education, and I guess that's really what it comes down to. Back in the day, when you and I went to university, you could get a summer job and earn enough to pay certainly for your tuition and perhaps a considerable cost to your education. So you didn't have to get into massive student debt. Today, that's not the case. I mean, crunch the numbers for me. So let's say I can get a summer job making, minimum wage or slightly higher. Maybe I get a job making $12 an hour.
All right. So you're making $480 an hour, or $480 a week gross if you work 40 hours. There's 16 weeks in the summer for a university student. So you might make $6,500. You'll have some tax taken off of that. So let's say you're able to save $5,000 because mom and dad pay for all your expenses over the summer. Well, the example you gave earlier was that the tuition was going to be $6,500. So I can't save enough in my summer break to pay for my tuition, let alone my ancillary fees, my books, my living expenses, and I might even want a beer once in a while.
No university student would ever do that, I'm sure. But yeah, you're right. The math just doesn't work. You cannot earn enough in a summer job to pay the full cost of your education. And obviously, yes, you can have a part-time job while you're in university. I work throughout university too, but let's face it, you can't be working 40 hours a week and still carrying a full course load. It just doesn't make sense. So let's take a look then at some of the trends that we have observed in our own world. So, and in particular, using student loans to finance education. So of our clients who have filed either a consumer proposal or a bankruptcy, what can you tell us about the level of student debt that they're carrying?
Well, so the first thing is more than 1 out of 8. So I think it's 13.4% from our last study are filing bankruptcy or proposal with some sort of student loan. So that's up half a percentage point from the last time we did the study, and it's been up every time we've done the study, which we do every 2 years.
And just to stop you there, that doesn't sound like a huge number, but you're not going bankrupt because of your student loan because of the way the rules work.
Right. Well, and it's hiding a fact too. So we're talking averages here when we talk about 1 in 8 of our clients. If you look at single moms, student loans are much more likely to be the cause of their personal insolvency, and the debt level is going to be higher. So it depends on how far you want to drill down into this.
Well, so we're going to talk about the single mothers and the female debtors because you're right, that's a big issue. Give me the big picture then. So 1 in 8 of people who end up filing a proposal or a bankruptcy have student debt. What kind of debt levels are we talking about?
So the average debt level right now is just about $14,000. Now keep in mind that you're excluded from including student loans in a bankruptcy or proposal unless you've been out of school for 7 years. So we're getting people filing with student debt, but it's not the people that graduated last year. The debt level of the current students is significantly higher, and we're going to see that as the trend pass over time.
So these are people who, in a lot of cases, have been struggling to pay their student debt for perhaps 7 years or more. They've still got $14,000 worth of debt, student loan debt, by the time they end up filing for a bankruptcy. So are all these people unemployed? Like, what's the issue?
No, the vast majority are working. It's something like 86% of them, but their take-home pay is lower than the average person that we see. And I think that makes sense because they got into the workforce later. I mean, it's not clear now, because the expectation is you're going to have a degree, that the degree will earn you more money long term. It's the card you need to play for access to the system. But the longer you've been working, probably the higher your pay is going to be, if that makes any sense to people.
It does. I see exactly what you're saying. There's that kind of time lag, a bit of a delay there. So the average person has $14,000 worth of student debt, of the people who have student debt when they end up filing bankruptcy. Obviously, that's not the only factor. If you've only got $14,000 worth of debt, you're probably not going to go bankrupt, assuming, like you said, 86% of them are working, they've got jobs. There's obviously other factors that are coming into play here.
Well, if you want to really get me going, 26% of the folks that file with student loan debt are using payday loans. Now, 18% of the people who file normally have it. So it's almost 50% more of the student loan carriers are using payday loans. And these are the worst form of debt that you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, and I'll put links in the show notes because you've had many rants on payday loans. We talked about them again on the first show of the season back in September as well as last year. What kind of dollars in payday loans are we talking about of the people who also have student loans?
Yeah, so the average person that's carrying, they're about $2,500 worth of payday loan debt. And just to put this in perspective, we were just talking about what the student might make in their summer job. $400 to $480 a week over the summer. Well, so over a 4-week period, they might bring home $1,600. Their student loan, their payday loan debt is $2,500. I mean, it's impossible to service.
The numbers are huge. And obviously, we're kind of comparing apples and oranges here, because obviously we're talking about people who are now not students anymore. They're in the workforce. And so other than the student loans, I assume they're also carrying things like credit card debt.
And they've got about $12,000 worth of credit card debt. So the average student profile, if you want to add those up quickly, $29,000 to $30,000. The student loans make up about 40% of the total. Credit cards are another 40%, and then the payday loans are the last chunk of it.
Yeah, and they could potentially have other debts as well, taxes or whatever. So I guess you kind of alluded to this earlier then. The trouble with this is I'm kind of building my life, right? I'm getting to the point now, I'm out of school. I'm now just building a family. Give me a sense in terms of the age of the people we're talking about. What's the profile of what this person who's burdened with student debt looks like?
Yeah, well, remember what I said earlier. You've got to have been out of school for 7 years before you can include a student loan in a bankruptcy or proposal. So the average age of these people is somewhere in the 30 to 39 years old. They've got the highest percentage of student debt. And that's the age where you're getting married, buying your first home, having your first kid, getting your first car. I mean, all of these firsts are supposed to be happening at this point in your life, and the student loans, I'm convinced, are delaying some of these decisions. You've got to service your student loan debt. You can't afford to be saving money for that first mortgage. You can't afford to be getting the car. You've got to seriously consider whether or not you can afford to have a kid. Although I found that if you give too much thought to having a kid, you might never have them. But that's a different show, a different conversation.
And I hear what you're saying. This isn't just a theoretical argument. It's not like, oh, well, those kids today, they should work harder and make more money. Well, but the implication of not being able to, or coming out of school with debt, is that everything then gets delayed.
And it's not just delayed for them, it's delayed for all of us. I mean, one of the chief drivers of our economy are new home acquisitions, people building and moving into new homes. It's buying all of these big capital ticket items you buy when you're first setting up a house. Well, if you have to delay that for 5 to 10 years because you're dealing with your student loans, that means George, who works at the plant that puts together refrigerators, isn't building a refrigerator for you for the next 5 to 10 years. And so on and so on. It
does ripple through the entire economy. It hurts all of us. Now, you had alluded earlier to female debtors. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, what's the difference? Males, females, they all get to go to school. If you look at university attendance, I think it's pretty well evenly split between males and females. But you're telling me there's a difference. What's the difference? Why? What's the scoop on that?
Yeah, well, so let's start with some numbers because, we're numbers guys.
We're numbers guys, yep.
60% of the people that file with student loan debt are female. So it's not a 50-50 split. It's a 2-to-1 split, women over men. The female student loan carriers have got 20% higher debt or more debt than the males. So the average male's got $12,500. The average student, female student, $15,000. That may not sound like a lot, but that extra $2,500 makes a significant difference to your monthly payments. And worse than that, the total amount of debt when a student female loan debtor files, the student loans are about a third of the total. With the men, it's about 25%.
So, and that is significant. I mean, if my student loan payment is going to be $100 a month or something because it's on one of these long repayment terms, an extra $2,000 or $3,000 plus interest really delays things in terms of getting things paid back. So what's the problem then? Why is it that student loans are more of a problem for women than men? Like, what are some of the issues that they're faced with?
Yeah, what we found is that it's not a question of employment. So that there are equal percentages of women and men with student loans that are filing bankruptcy or proposal that are employed. The issue is the female students are experiencing more unstable income. So there are periods of unemployment for them, or perhaps a maternity leave or disability, that perhaps they're taking care of a family member that's not doing well. There are lots of reasons that they're all women's issues, and it affects them at the bottom line.
And it's not particularly fair, but you're right. That's the way it is. It's much more likely that a female is going to end up taking care of a sick parent, for example.
Right.
Or obviously having a baby. That's pretty much a female thing, from what I understand. They're the ones who are going to be going on maternity leave, and sure, males can go on paternity leave as well. But it's this interruption in employment that then makes it that much more difficult to pay back the student loans and just delays everything from there. Is that essentially what it is?
Fall back to the comment we made 5 minutes ago, where if you're in school, you're delaying being out in the workforce and making money. Well, and so when the female student graduates, if she's got her employment interrupted, it also delays her ability to make money. So it's pretty straightforward.
It all flows through.
Without sounding like somebody on the left, the biggest single issue might be single parents. 30% of the female student debtors are single parents looking after one or more children. It's 30% for all the women that file with us, and only 18% of all debtors.
Yeah, so just to restate that 37% of people with student debt are single parents, as compared to 30% of all women who get into financial trouble and only 18% of all debtors. So it skews very heavily that single females are going to have student debt.
That's right.
And that, again, leads to exactly what you've just said. Everything else flows from that then.
That's right. And quite frankly, that's why they end up falling back on payday loans and credit cards. It's all of these different things to get access to money just so they can survive. This female student debtors aren't incurring debt for luxury items or for things that the rest of us would find superfluous. They're doing it to survive.
And you talked about how this delays everything going forward. What about, do you have any numbers on things like home ownership? Because you made that point earlier, and that makes perfect sense to me. If that's delayed, then that's not just something affecting the individual, that's affecting the entire economy. What kind of numbers do we have in that case?
We've been doing these studies for quite a while now. And previously, the home ownership percentage was about 1 in 4. And so 1 out of every 4 people that filed bankruptcy or proposal with us
Well, it was
one in 3. Now it's 1 in 4. So now I'm confusing the issue. So it means a third fewer people are able to access the home market. And we've got historic low interest rates right now. It should be going the other way. It doesn't make sense that fewer and fewer people are able to own homes.
But obviously, lower interest rates also make home prices higher, and that kind of flows everything flows through it too. So okay, the people are listening to this now, and I know we have a number of older listeners, people even older than you and I who went to school many years ago. Their kids are growing and whatever, and they're sitting back saying, "Look, this is not a big deal. Why don't the parents step up then? If you want your kids to go to university, then you should step up. There's things like RESPs. You can start contributing when your kid is born. So by the time they get to university, there should be lots of money put aside there. And if you weren't able to save, well, you can still be contributing. You can go out and borrow if you're an older person now and finance your kids or your grandchildren's education. What's the problem with that?"
Well, the real issue is we're seeing it now. They call themselves the sandwich generation. The folks that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, well, let's say 50s, 60s, that have got children doing post-secondary, and they're trying to help them out, and they've got parents going into institutions or require some sort of care or assistance. And they're doing exactly what you said. They can't fund it out of their income, so they are borrowing. They're refinancing their house, they're cashing out retirement savings, or they're running up credit card or other debt. The fastest growing segment of debtors, people incurring debt, are the 50-plus crowd. The folks that should be at the point in their life when things are getting better, we're seeing them accumulating more and more debt relative to the other folks that file.
And so it's not as simple as saying, okay, well, you're 55 years old, help your kids out. Those are the people who are also in financial trouble.
That's exactly right, because you can't be helping your kids and your parents and looking after your own retirement, which is coming 10 years from now. If you haven't started saving for your retirement by now, you're going to be in trouble. But that's another show.
And we have certainly talked about seniors issues on this show as well. So to wrap up this segment, really what we're saying is it is a problem. Student debt is continuing to grow because the cost of education continues to grow. There's no other way to do it in a lot of cases other than to finance it through debt. And it's not just a student issue. It affects the entire economy because it delays life choices. And it's not something that parents can just write a check for because they've got the same kind of financial issues as well.
In fact, what we have to decide is how are we going to educate and train our population? So is it something we're all going to pay for, or are we going to continue to pass the cost of this on to the individuals that do it? And it's a balancing act. But hark back to this. Schools have become a business. The fact that ancillary fees are higher than tuition fees tells you that the universities are looking at ways to pay for things other than just providing the education. And this is something we got to deal with sooner better than later.
And unfortunately, we don't have the answer to it, but you're right. Ancillary fees today are higher than what tuition was back in the day when we went to, and it's something we're all going to have to put our heads together and figure out a solution on. Great. Thanks very much for joining me today, Ted.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30 with Doug Hoyes. We'll be right back.
If you're struggling with debt, you have options. A consumer proposal is a legal process that allows you to settle your debts for a portion of what you owe. To see if this solution is right for you, go online to consumer-proposals.org, a website all about proposals. Consumer-proposals.org, a great place to start on your way to becoming debt-free.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. On today's show, Ted Michalos and I talked about the high cost of post-secondary education, and we discussed the significant burden caused by student loans, both on former students specifically and society in general. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. So, what's my take on post-secondary education? As I've said on this show before, I believe it's essential that you do a lot of research and number crunching before you sign on the dotted line for a big student loan. The first and most important question is, do I really need to go to college or university? I know that we're all conditioned to believe that a university degree is essential to getting a good job. But is it? In some cases, yes. You can't be a doctor or other professional without a university education, so if your goal is to enter a profession that requires post-secondary education, fine. However, if you aren't really sure what you want to do with your life, which is quite common amongst high school students, getting a big student loan should not be at the top of your list of things to do. Working for a year or two may be a better option, and you may find out that learning a trade or just getting some work experience is a better option than getting a big student loan. Every situation is different, so crunch the numbers and make an informed decision. That's our show for today. Full show notes are available on our website, including links to everything we discussed today, so please go to our website at hoyes.com, that's HOYES.com, for more information. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. That was Debt Free in 30.